everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Green Scare Pod. So today I'm joined by probably the craziest guest yet. It's the man, the myth, the legend, the founder of the Animal Liberation Front, Ronnie Lee. Thank you so much for joining me, Ronnie.
Oh, it's a pleasure, Ritik. It's great to be here. I was actually one of the founders. There were several of us that actually founded the ALF, but I'm probably the best known because I've probably carried on with activism more than the others, so I'm probably the best known of them. But there were six of us all together right at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Sadly, one of them passed away in 2002. A woman called Sue Smith. I mean, obviously, I can name her now. She's no longer with us. And the I think there's one guy involved in animal rescue. There's another guy now lives in the USA. Not too sure. I'm not too sure what he's doing. I mean, it's still vegan.
Mm-hmm.
There's another one who's actually very ill at the moment. And let me think. And there's one guy that I lost touch with long time ago. Not too long after it all started. I think that counts. Does that count for the other five? I think so. I think
Well,
so.
thanks.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, yeah, that's thanks for sharing that with us. I mean, as you said, like you may be the best known, but that was five other people. Wow.
Yes. Yeah.
So, what first motivated you to go vegan and get involved with animal rights?
Well, what happened? It was really was when I was 18 years of age, and my sister started going out with a guy who was vegetarian, and my mum hated it because she regarded this guy as a crank because he was vegetarian. But I was curious as I'd never really heard about anyone being a vegetarian before. I mean, this was way back in 1969, and so I kind of asked him about it, and asked my sister, and he'd been vegetarian since he was quite a young boy, and he was great. He was a great athlete. He represented the county athletics. Very fit guy, and he said, "Well, we don't need to kill and eat animals. It's not necessary for us to do that for our health and survival, so we shouldn't do it." It was as simple as that. And I was a really big meat eater. I was, really bad. Used to eat loads of meat in different ways. And but it kind of, but I'd always, cared about, sort of cared about our fellow animals. I'd acted to protect them, on a number of occasions. And so it played on my conscience. And I think I kind of lay awake for about 3 nights trying to find an excuse to carry on eating meat. And I kind of couldn't, because here was this guy that was been a vegetarian for years, was really healthy. His reasons for it were really sound. So I decided to become a vegetarian. And my sister became vegetarian as well, which was good because we were able to support each other. And then about 2.5 years later, and this would be kind of in the spring of 1972, I picked up a copy of the Vegetarian Society's magazine in a health food store, and there was an article in there about veganism, and I was kind of really shocked because I hadn't thought about the cows and the calves and the hens and and the chicks, for instance, because I kind of, obviously meat comes from a slaughtered animal that can't be avoided, but I didn't think about those other things. I think like a lot of vegetarians don't. I mean, especially in those days when veganism was virtually unknown. And I decided, well, I've got to go vegan now. Absolutely, And at the same time, in the same magazine, there were articles or advertisements about organisations opposing animal experiments, opposing the fur trade and hunting. And that shocked me as well because I wasn't aware of any of those things either. So I thought, this is terrible. I've got to do something about all this. So I started off becoming vegan. I kind of adopted a vegan diet, became vegan really quickly. And then it wasn't long after that, there was a news item on the television about the hunt saboteurs. And I thought to myself, right, I got to join, I got to join these guys. I got to get involved in that. So that's what I did. So it all happened very quickly.
So, when and how did you form the Animal Liberation Front?
Well, basically what it was I was more the hunt saboteurs, and they kind of, their methods of preventing animals being killed by the hunt. I mean, this is, hunting here in the UK, referred to hunting is in the USA. It's people shooting other animals, but over here it's many people on horseback with a pack of dogs that go out in the countryside and chase after foxes and deers and hares.
And they're often ripped apart while
Yeah,
still alive
yeah,
by the dogs.
yes,
Yeah.
they are. Does happen. That does happen quite often. Or they go to ground. In the case of a fox, they'll go into uh, they'll go into a fox earth, or they go into somewhere underground, and then they dig them out and kill them. So that happens quite a lot as well. So, but that's based on the hunt sabotage is based on kind of interrupting the chase in various ways, like covering the scent of the fox, or hunt saboteurs who use hunting horns to mimic what the hunters do and call the hounds away. And there's all these various methods. But there's a type of hunting that occurs early in the hunting season, which is around about August time, where basically they just send all the dogs, or hounds as they call them, into a wood to just massacre foxes, and a lot of them are young foxes, the fox cubs, to give the younger hounds a taste of blood, to get them fired up for when the hunting season proper starts. And it was very difficult to stop that, because there wasn't a chase involved, and we couldn't really get into the woods to protect the foxes, because there were so many members of the hunt there that would have, obviously very violent people. So some of us started wondering if there was another way to do something about this. And we had a meeting in London. It was in a basement cafe in London, and we were kind of huddled in a corner at a table. That was the six of us in this basement cafe, and we decided that what we would do is go to the hunt kennels, where they kept the dogs, and where the hunts were based at the kennels, and damage their vehicles, so they couldn't actually go out, to do this cub hunting, which they did, really early in the morning. It was often about 6 a.m. So we would decide we'd go in the early hours, damage their vehicles, and so they couldn't go. But we couldn't do that under the banner of the Hunt Saboteurs Association, because they tried to operate within the law. So we had to form a different organisation in order to do that. So, and the name we decided on initially was the Band of Mercy, which sounds rather strange, but it was because there were RSPCA youth groups, kind of strangely enough, in the 19th century, called the Bands of Mercy, and some of them were really quite militant, and they took direct action. And then I think there was one instance where they damaged guns that
Wow.
were going to be used to shoot, to shoot animals. And
were they vegetarians?
Not necessarily. I don't think so. No, maybe some of them were. It was basically they were basically groups for young people to. The aim of the groups was to teach young people kindness towards animals, but obviously sounds like some of them were quite militant, and that's not something that would happen in connection with the RSPCA today. But it was
right.
rather different back in the early days. So
that's why I was surprised, because these
Yeah.
days we associate groups with the RSPCA with just carnivores. Not
Well, yeah. That's right. I mean, they're obviously not an organisation that promotes veganism. So anyway, we thought, well, okay, we'll use the name the Band of Mercy, sort of revive the spirit of these groups that took direct action in the 19th century. But 3 years later, in '76, the name was changed to the Animal Liberation Front
Mm.
because it was felt that we needed a name that actually said what it was about. The Band of Mercy didn't mention animals; it sounded rather religious, and so there was a general feeling that the name should change, and it was decided that Animal Liberation Front was a much better name, and that's what we adopted.
It truly is a wonderful name, Animal Liberation Front, especially
Mm.
with the Earth Liberation Front spinoff as well. I mean, once you
Yeah,
hear the names of
right.
these groups, you know what
Yeah,
they are, and if you're on the wrong end,
yeah,
you're afraid.
yeah. Well, it says what it's about, So
Exactly.
that's why we liked it.
Yep. So, what were some of the first campaigns or raids or whatever that the ALF participated in? How did the movement start out?
Well, kind of when it was still the Band of Mercy, the first actions were against hunting, and they were raids on hunt kennels where we caused damage to their vehicles. We didn't
Hmm.
cause huge amounts of damage. We just kind of did enough to disable the vehicles, punctured the tires, and we put tacks in the ignition, glue in the ignition or in the door
Wow.
lock, so they couldn't, to immobilize the vehicle. It was that level of damage, really. And then we found out about an animal research laboratory that was being built, and it was planned for there to be experiments there involving radiation. They were going to irradiate animals,
Hmm.
and there'd been a local campaign, a campaign by local anti-vivisectionists to try to stop this laboratory being built, to stop permission being given for it to be built. But that campaign failed. So we decided, right, we'll kind of we'll bide our time and wait till the building's partially constructed, and then we'll try to destroy it. And myself and another guy, we actually made 2 attempts to burn down this laboratory that was under construction. What we did, we went there and we waited for the workforce to leave, so it was
Hmm.
empty. And then we checked inside, made sure nobody was in it, and then we made 2 attempts to set fire to it. And sadly, it wasn't completely destroyed. There was a lot of damage was done to it, but and the opening of it was delayed because of that. But sadly, it wasn't destroyed, and we weren't able to go back a third time because they'd put lots of security on it by then. They'd realised that it was a target, and they'd stepped up the security, so we weren't able to carry out a third attack on it. And then we that was in the November of 1973, and then the following year in the June, once again there were just 2 of us, and we caused some serious damage to fishing boats that were going to be used to hunt baby seals.
Hmm.
It was like a sideline. These guys that these fishermen. This was off the sort of northeast coast of England. Um, it was like a sideline they had of killing the baby seals and selling their pelts. Their white pelts. And there'd been campaigns against this for a number of years, but it still carried on. So we went and seriously damaged their boats, and it resulted in not only did that hunt not take place that year, but it's never taken place since then.
Wow.
That's 50 years later. It's never taken place again. So that was really quite something. And the other thing we did was we received from a sympathiser who worked in I think it was a company that made kind of scientific equipment. They weren't involved with animals, didn't use animals, but they received they were sent a list of places that bred animals for experiments, and the guy that was working at this place, he passed the list on to us, so we used it as a hit list because the places that bred the animals were easier targets than the laboratories, because even there wasn't so much security on places back in the day because it was more expensive than it is now in the digital age. But a lot of the laboratories had security because there was expensive equipment in there. But the places that bred the animals and supplied the animals very often didn't. And so we thought, well, yeah, we'll target those places, and we started attacking the animal breeders, attacking their premises, mainly causing damage to the vehicles they used to supply the animals to laboratories. And then in I think it was the August of 70. It was the August of 74. Two of us were caught. We were caught on one of these places. There was a security guard there who saw us and pressed a button that alerted the police, and the police surrounded the place, and we were arrested. And then eventually we were sentenced to 3 years in prison, and we were in prison for a year. We were released early because we had no previous convictions, but we both served a year in prison for a number of different charges related to attacking these places.
What are some of the most intense and memorable moments you faced in your activism?
Well, there was one case where, and once again, this was in the days of the Band of Mercy, where we raided a place that bred guinea pigs for laboratories, and our aim was to cause damage to their vehicle. But when we got there, the vehicle had gone. I think the person who drove the vehicle had probably taken it home. And so we got into the place and we rescued. We hadn't planned to do this, but we rescued 6 baby guinea pigs.
Wow.
And it was quite a cold night. So as we were driving, we contacted a friend who lived about 10 miles away and asked him if we could take the guinea pigs around to his house, and he agreed. And in actual fact, he looked after them for the rest of their life. But on the way, and we put the guinea pigs up our jumpers, to keep them warm. And on the way driving to this guy's house, we were stopped by the police because there'd been a spate of house burglaries in the area, and they were suspicious of us because we were out in the early hours of the morning. But we had what we were doing. We were camping near to these. We kind of went on a kind. It was a kind of holiday,
right?
An activist holiday. We were camping near to these places that bred animals for laboratories, and then we were, we were kind of pulling up the tent in the early hours of the morning, going to the place, carrying out the raid, and then going near to the next place. We're doing it like that night after night. And because we told the police that we were on a camping holiday and we'd had problems with the car, and that's why we were out so late. And they saw the camping equipment in the car, and so they believed us. But luckily they didn't search us because we had these guinea pigs up our jumpers, and thankfully they didn't make any noise. So we were able to kind of get away with it, and the guinea pigs lived out their lives with our friend. And as a result of that, just that raid, taking those 6 guinea pigs, that place closed down.
Wow.
Because the people that ran it were so afraid that activists knew where they were,
right, and
what would happen next, that they closed their business down. So that was that was quite memorable. That obviously for for the whole the whole series of events. The guinea pigs being rescued in the police, and then the place closing down. So that was a good one.
Yeah. And that's the great thing for people watching to keep in mind. I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be a huge direct action that can force people out of businesses. Often people just get intimidated into leaving.
Oh yes, and that's what happened. That's what happened with that
Indeed.
particular place. Yeah.
So, Ronnie, you've been a vegan for over 50 years, right?
Yes, it's 52 years, 52 and a half years, actually, to be more accurate. Yeah.
Wow. What's it been like?
Well, I mean, it's a lot easier these days to kind of to sort of live as a vegan. I mean, like, kind of, I certainly in the area where I live, there's loads of places where you can eat out and get vegan friendly food, and obviously, in the supermarkets, there's all sorts of. I mean, there's always been food suitable for vegans, because obviously that's the vegetables, isn't it, and the nuts and the fruit and all that's all been around forever. But the more kind of, processed stuff, there's a lot more of that now around, and I think that certainly. I mean, that doesn't particularly bother me, because when I first became vegan, there wasn't any of that, and so if that didn't exist, it wouldn't bother me that much. But I think for people becoming vegan, it kind of makes it easier for them to change their diet, and then maybe they can later on perhaps wean themselves off that and start eating stuff that's a bit more healthy. But certainly, I think in the beginning it makes it easier. I mean, for instance, back in the early 70s, when I first became vegan here in the UK, there was no obligation for sort of manufacturers of food products to label the ingredients on the packet or the jar or whatever. And so we pretty much had to guess what was suitable for vegans. And I remember we were eating peanut butter. There was only one make of peanut butter widely available at the time, and we were eating that, thinking, "No, this is fine. It's only peanuts." And then a guy in our sort of local animal rights group, he wrote to the company that produced the peanut butter to ask what was in it. And when the letter came back, it said it contained beef fat. It had been putting beef fat in the peanut butter, and so we couldn't eat it anymore. And it was the same with a lot of bread. A lot of bread that now contains vegetable oil, back in those days, it contained animal fat. So there was there were only a couple of makes of bread that we could eat, and they weren't particularly widely available. So
wow.
a lot of us made our own bread for that reason, to make sure that it was vegan friendly. So it was much more difficult to kind of operate in society as a vegan. But because we were vegan, which is the only reason anyone can truly be vegan, which is for animal liberation, because we basically didn't want to pay someone to kill animals for us. We stuck to it. Yeah, it was difficult to operate in society, but that wasn't going to stop us, because however difficult it was for us, it was massively more difficult for the animals that would have been slaughtered had we continued to eat animal products. See, so that's where we were. We were determined, to stick to it, really.
That's right. So for anyone listening, if Ronnie's been able to do it for over 52 years with how difficult it was back then, you can give it a go. And trust me, once you give it a go, you'll realize how easy it is.
Yeah.
A few months later, you won't miss the old stuff, and you'll feel like you've been eating dogs and cats your whole life. At least that's what happened to me. I was like, what have I been doing?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's actually no different. And people, complain about, people in other countries such as China and there's parts of Africa as well, where dogs and cats are eaten, but it's no different to.
And what's horrible nowadays is I see so many people, especially those who try and come off as cosmopolitan, who see dogs being beaten and like blowtorched and boiled alive in China, and say, "Hey, I mean, we do the same thing to pigs, so that's okay. I'm gonna go and do that too. I'm gonna go and try out dog meat in China. I want to do that." It's like, listen, just because something's widespread, that doesn't necessarily mean you have to do it at all. I mean, that's wrong, and what we do is also wrong. That should be the thought process.
I mean, absolutely, and the argument for veganism, or certainly for adopting a vegan-friendly diet, is really simple. That we can live perfectly well without exploiting and killing other animals, so we shouldn't do it. It's as simple as that. Why are we doing that? Causing all that slaughter and suffering when it's not necessary. It has to be wrong. The argument for veganism is so simple, and I think that's the way to look at it. Like I do a lot of vegan outreach these days, and the main thing that people bring up is cheese. They say, I'd like to go vegan, or adopt a vegan-friendly diet, but I can't find a cheese that's as nice as the dairy cheese. And I said, well, look, you're looking at it the wrong way around. You don't become vegan because you find a vegan-friendly cheese that's as nice as dairy cheese. You become vegan because you don't want to be part. Don't think of it that way. Think of it. I'm not going to be part of this exploitation and oppression of other animals, so I'm not going to consume animal products. And then I'm going to look around and see what I can consume instead. I'm not going to do
Yeah.
it,
And for
doing
people
it
who
the
don't
wrong way.
understand the problem
Yeah,
with dairy,
yeah,
I mean, dairy involves, especially in the West, but now globally. They do this in India too. So much for cows being sacred. It involves cows being bred into existence, like their repeated artificial insemination and the murder of their calves, which is where we get veal from.
mm,
And eventually, the cows themselves are so overburdened from being repeatedly impregnated that they're what's called spent, and they're turned into hamburger meat. They're killed and macerated. And like when I sit here and I say this, it sounds like some kind of like horror movie material or like tribal like war ritual that we look back on with horror. But no, I mean this is what we do every day in industrial farms for the
it's
food that we get, and
yeah,
it's just
it's
there's
absolutely. And I
it's
mean,
not about finding an alternative, as Ronnie said, to animal products, or how can I eat what I want to eat. It's just realizing, hey, I got to leave my old
you
habits
just
and
you,
lifestyle behind.
you stop. You say, right, because veganism is a philosophy about animal liberation.
That's right.
It's accepting that humans aren't more important than other sentient animals. There's no logical or moral reason for anyone to believe that or suppose that. And therefore, um, it's totally wrong for us to exploit and oppress our fellow animals. And so we, it's, we're obliged to do our best not to be part of that.
Hmm.
And adopting a vegan friendly diet is a really big way we can stop being part of that. Because in everyone's, for most people, the main thing they do in in their ordinary lives that contributes to the exploitation and oppression of other animals is consumption of animal products.
That's right.
So
Yeah.
it's a really, really vital step that people can take,
Hmm.
and it's kind of so easy these days, to kind of, you know, to 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 live, to live as vegan. No, it's completely different to when I started off. But because I had that core belief in animal liberation, it didn't matter to me how difficult it was. I would, was determined to stick to it.
Yeah. And as you said, it's easier as it ever could be because
Yeah,
I'll tell you something. 2 years in, I missed fried chicken. And what did I do? I went and I got myself a vegan fried chicken and I ate it, and it was 95% as good. You can still eat anything you want as a vegan. You just eat the vegan alternative. And it might not be as good, but if you do a little bit of an equation, I mean, you take, for example, real cheese and you take the best vegan cheese, there is no way that the difference between those two can justify the things we do to animals.
at the end of the day, it's only a taste. So,
Absolutely.
is it justifiable to um, exploit those animals, kill them, and in most cases put them through, horrific suffering for a taste? That's all it is. There's loads of other tastes. There's loads of
Absolutely.
wonderful tastes from the, from the vegetable kingdom. Loads of lovely spices and herbs and everything. So, it's only a taste. Is
That's
it's
right.
you know, and that's how, you know we need to encourage people to look at it in that fundamental way. That we're not entitled to exploit other animals and oppress them.
Mhm. Well, Ronnie, I have to completely agree with you there, and I see your vegan flag in the background. I want to raise it to
Absolutely.
my own here.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Yes, I
Put
was.
that up.
Yeah, that's absolutely great. Well, hopefully it will be flying all over the world. All these flags of all the different nation states will be removed, and we'll just have the vegan flag, you know,
Absolutely.
flying
And I
everywhere.
want to see a vegan world as much as you do. But
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
one thing I do want to ask you is, I mean, in the 50 years since you've been vegan and in all the time that activists have spent campaigning for veganism, it really doesn't seem like we've actually seen an increase in the percentage of the population um, who are vegan, nor does it seem that people are decreasing their meat consumption. In fact, people are rapidly increasing their meat consumption,
I,
especially globally.
I think
And
that's true. Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think certainly here in the UK, there has been a percentage increase in the number of vegans, certainly from
I see.
over the years, over decades. But it's still really
Oh, sorry.
quite.
I think what I thought about was a percentage increase in vegetarians, and that number has barely changed. And a minority of people who, I think a lot of the people who have gone vegan are people who would have been vegetarian otherwise. So what it looks like is the small percentage of the population who take, yeah, who are conscious about what they eat are now more likely to go vegan. It just doesn't seem though that the vast majority of the population pays any attention to it.
Well, and the other reason is there's been in it. I've got another cat here. This is Jazz. If I
Amazing.
can entice her onto my knee, then she's not blocking the screen. Come on, she's um,
Adorable.
she's quite an old girl, and she's got a few health problems, so I've got to be very gentle with her. There she is. That's a good girl.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Um, uh, yeah, and also that two other factors. I mean, first of all, there's been an increasing population generally throughout the world,
That's right. That is true.
and most of those people are going to consume animal products. And the other thing is that countries that previously consumed relatively few animal products are now adopting a more Western diet where they're kind of consuming. And I think a lot
My
of it,
family's from India, and I go back there every year. Oh boy.
yeah, because and I think it's um, because there's an association between meat and kind of status in a
There
sense of
is.
these cultures. And what's happened, because I think mainly because of kind of intensive farming, it's become cheaper to produce meat, and so it's now become available to people in a way that it wasn't previously available. So they're able to consume it or consume more of it now, and so
That's
that's.
right.
But I think fundamentally, the solution to all of this is vegan outreach, and I think we've kind of certainly here in the UK, we have had there has been a percentage increase in the number of vegans, and I think that's despite the rise in population over the years. Um, with uh, a degree of vegan outreach that's not been that great. There's really over here, vegan outreach. It's only been going perhaps 25 years. When people started kind of doing stuff in the street, and the vegan fairs and that kind of thing. And it's really been quite small. Quite a small amount of vegan outreach has resulted in um, in a rise in the number of vegans, and certainly has created a situation where it's much easier to live as a vegan. I mean, what's happening is the reason why there are all these products in these supermarkets now, and the reason why so many eating places have vegan options is because they know that there's a demand for that. I know that demand doesn't necessarily all come from vegans. There's people that are flexitarians and all that contributing to the demand, but I think the rise in the number of vegans is part of that. And I think what we need is a lot more outreach. If we can create a situation where there's a lot more vegan outreach, I think we would see a big increase in the number of vegans. And I think one major problem we've got is that there's been an increase in the number of vegans, but the number of those vegans who are actually activists is very, very small.
I think the number of vegans who are doing it for actual, like, relevant reasons, like animals, is not necessarily some or even most of them. I mean, I routinely meet vegans who, don't really seem to get the animal issue. and do it for other reasons.
Yeah, I mean, I think more people are well. It's not really becoming vegan, is it? They're
That's right.
adopting a vegan friendly diet, aren't they?
Right,
But
right. They've adopted a vegan diet, and
yeah, vegan diet.
yeah,
But um, there's a lot more that kind of are doing it for health reasons and environmental reasons now, rather than for animal liberation.
that's right.
But I think whenever there's a survey, I see that different, say, Facebook groups I'm in, vegan groups where someone puts up a survey, what's the reason you're vegan, or why, the reason why you consume a vegan friendly diet. The majority of people say it's for the animals. That's still that kind of still
Well,
is
I mean, but that is also the kind of Facebook group that you would end up in, right? So,
yeah. So that might be that might be kind of
mm.
because of the type of group
The
it
reason I
is.
ask, because almost
Yeah.
kind of the direction I want to push you in is because there's an alternate view that I've heard, a lot of people express. Certainly, some people whom I'm going to have on, which is, I mean, you've spoken to Jay Conroy about this. I watched that video.
Oh yeah,
The
absolutely.
idea of making animal activists or making people get concerned with animals and not necessarily pushing veganism first and foremost, because I'm going to be honest. I mean, at least from what I've heard a lot of people say, veganism might be more popular than ever, but in the past, I mean, whereas people hadn't heard of it, nowadays a lot of people actively seem to hate vegans and hate the idea of going vegan, which is weird because if you ask these same people, they're against, factory farming at least, which even if you're only against factory farming, you should still be vegan. And they're against, fur, which, I mean, isn't really too different to what happens in the meat industry. It's certainly not very different from the animal's point of view. And I think, it's possible that we're just going to get way more people on our side if we don't frame it as vegan outreach and instead, uh,
I yeah, I think though that situation is because there's not enough outreach and there's not enough of the right sort of outreach. I mean, I think that we kind of, if we're ever going to achieve what I call an animal liberationist society, which doesn't necessarily mean that everyone will be philosophically vegan. I think it would be impossible to have a human society where everyone was philosophically vegan, just as
but
if it's.
certainly the society would tend in that direction, which
But
ours doesn't.
yeah,
Right.
we need to be vegans need to be the dominant force in society. We need to be the ones that call the shots, basically.
Hmm.
So how do we get to that situation? How do we kind of achieve that situation? And we only achieve that situation by educating ordinary people, because we're not going to achieve animal liberation while the vast majority of ordinary people don't believe in it.
Hmm.
And I think this was kind of where that's where the kind of there were limitations, I would say, in terms of the ALF, because the ALF was a campaign that was directly against those establishments and those individuals as well that were involved in the exploitation and oppression of other animals. And it didn't involve the public at all. There was no attempt to educate the public. They were just on the sidelines, And I think that meant that what any campaign like that could achieve would be limited in the general scheme of things. I mean, the ALF certainly here in the UK, achieved a great deal. That there was a huge fall in the number of animal experiments that here that coincided with ALF activity against the vivisection industry. And the ALF was instrumental in decimating the fur trade over here. So that those are the two big.
Certainly in the U.S. as well.
Yeah, and
especially Rod Coronado.
Well, and obviously, I would say that resulted in very large millions of animals being spared, particularly in terms
Indeed.
of the animal experiments. But nevertheless, it was kind of when we measure that against the totality of the oppression of other animals, because the two huge areas where humans oppress and exploit other animals are first of all for food industry, and secondly its adverse human impact on the environment. the
Right.
natural
Here in the
world.
U.S., I mean, cars are the second largest cause of animal mortality after the meat industry.
Oh, absolutely, and I mean it's quite likely the case over here
Oh yeah,
as well.
I imagine so.
Um,
Yeah,
and then you know
probably any industrialized society. Of
yeah, it would be, and then you've got the climate crisis. I mean, there's billions of
course.
animals being killed in these forest fires, and that's only one example of you know where their other animals are suffering and dying because of the climate crisis, which is you know something humans have caused, something humans have done to the planet. So that's a huge area of concern, I would say, to vegans and animal liberationists, and I think until we um, and how are we going to achieve animal liberation when the vast majority of people don't believe in it? How is that going to be possible? And you know that's why I believe educating ordinary people um, to look at the world really and look at the status of humans in the world in a completely different way. You know that we're not more important than other sentient animals. You know, we shouldn't exploit or oppress them, and we should kind of live according to those principles. Unless we educate a sufficient number of people to, you know, to have that mindset, we're never going to achieve widespread animal liberation. All we're going to achieve is like minor changes, you know, welfare reforms, and you know, we're going to end areas of the oppression of other animals that are really quite small in terms of the overall picture. So, you know, that's why I think, you know, vegan outreach, proper sort of vegan outreach is really important in tackling the problem at a fundamental level. And the other difficulty that sort of direct action campaigns have had has been with the involvement of the state, like the ALF. The ALF over here, I mean, it's still operates. There's still a few actions, but it's very small, very few actions compared with what it was sort of back in the 70s, 80s, and even the 90s. And that's because of the states, because of
Right. The Green
um,
Scare.
yeah, well, special police squads being set up to kind of
Mm.
you know investigate and arrest animal liberation activists, new laws being brought in, you know, much more stringent you know, longer prison sentences, all these measures that and massively increased surveillance. I think probably the UK is probably in terms of like CCTV and stuff like that, it's probably the most surveilled society in the world.
It's unbelievable. It's
Yeah,
becoming the UK is
yeah,
just slowly becoming a fascist state. My first guest,
yeah, yeah.
Jerry Vlasek, and the other co-founder of the Animal Liberation Press Office, Steve Best. I mean, both of them were banned from the UK because of their
Oh,
free
absolutely.
speech.
Yes, they have been. I mean, I'm banned from the USA.
Are you?
Yes, because of my criminal record.
Oh, I see.
You say I wouldn't get a visa to. Also,
But neither Steve nor Jerry even have criminal records. They were banned for
no,
their free speech. That's insane.
what they said, no. So, and I think also Australia, which is strange because Australia was sort of founded by prisoners being sent there, and yet I can't go there myself. Not that I really want to. Not that I really want to go to.
Oh.
Nor do I need it, but I. I could probably sneak in there if I wanted to, but officially I wouldn't be able to go. And what I'm saying is basically because of the nature of the state, because and basically what we have is a speciesist culture in society, a human supremacist
Mm.
culture, and that's reflected in governments, you know, and so those governments are going to act to um, crush animal liberationists, and once they become too um, especially when these big industries are threatened, like for instance the vivisection industry comes under threat. The government, because the government is human supremacist in nature, they will step in to crush, you know, to crush those campaigns, and you know, people will go to prison and so forth, and that's the problem. So we need to change the nature of those administrations so they're much more favourable to animal liberation. And kind of how do we do that? We only do that really through changing ordinary people, because it's ordinary people who are the voters, and it's from the general population that the politicians will come. In other words, if we create more vegans, we'll get more vegan politicians, and we'll get more vegans to vote for those politicians. And so that way you change the nature of the administration as well. So you've got the power of individual change in terms of humans no longer consuming animal products and not contributing, doing their best to avoid contributing to the exploitation and oppression of other animals. And then you've got the political aspect of it, in terms of how that then affects the political administration, making it much more favourable to what we want. And so unless we do educate a lot more people to become vegan, we're not going to get any of that. We're not going to get any. And as soon as these pressure campaigns start to become successful, they'll be crushed. And that's and we need to kind of learn from history, because it happened with the ALF, it happened with Shack.
Happened with Shack. That's very true.
Yeah. You see, the main lesson to learn from the Shack campaign is that it was crushed by the states. There's a lot of, that they had a lot of successes. Persuading all these companies not to support hunting and life sciences, but in the end, that campaign was crushed by the states. Yeah. And if that's happened again and again and again, we've got to be really careful of we don't kind of create a Groundhog Day situation here, where, because that's starting again. We're starting to get that over here again, where there's pressure campaigns building up. There's a place over here called MBR Acres, which is a beagle breeding place. You've probably heard of Camp Beagle.
Of course, yeah. I think some of the people from Shack are now.
Yeah, because they've started a pressure campaign. They've started, and they've already had some success in persuading companies not to provide products or services to MBR Acres. And that's great. It puts pressure on the vivisection industry as a whole, of course, when that happens. But kind of what will happen if that campaign, grows and becomes a real threat to the vivisection industry, as Shack was? I can't see anything but the state moving in again, because the nature of the state here has not changed since the day when Shack was crushed, unless we do something about, because what happens then is we're constantly banging our heads against a brick wall, and so you've got to do something to weaken that wall or remove that wall, and we have to change the nature of the state, and the only way you do that is by changing all your people. And that's why I think widespread vegan education is really important. I wouldn't say instead of pressure campaigns, but I would say that my position is a kind of unless position, that unless we have widespread vegan education and educate a lot more people to become vegan, we're never going to get very far. We're only going to have the most minor of victories in the scheme of things. See, which is why that is kind of very much my focus. And we're only going to get that if a lot more vegans become involved in outreach. That's the kind of that's the sort of fundamental problem we kind of have to solve, really. How do we how do we achieve that?
Yeah, I think that's certainly, I mean, I don't know. I've only been active in the animal rights movement at all for a very short period of time, whereas you've been here for a very long period of time. And fundamentally, however we're going to come at it, do you have hope for the future of animal liberation?
I don't really, I kind of don't really think in terms of hope. I just think in terms of what we have to do if we're going to achieve it. And I think that, we're not going to achieve widespread animal liberation unless we educate a lot more people to believe in it. So that's very much my focus. That doesn't mean that I don't support other things that people are doing. It doesn't mean I don't support direct action. I don't support things like hunt saboteurs. I don't support animal rescue. I support all those things. That all these things contribute. Animals are being rescued. Animals are being spared through those things. But unless we have widespread vegan education, we're not going to be. We have to be. We have to be much more bold in what we're trying to do. And and instead of, because I think for a long time, really kind of all along, all down the decades, like the animal liberation movement has thought of we've kind of thought of ourselves as kind of rebels.
Mm.
You know, we're rebelling against this kind of edifice of, you know, the state and the existing system. You know, whereas what we have to think of ourselves really more is as revolutionaries, that
Change the system.
we want to take over.
Exactly.
We have to take the state instead of like bashing our heads against the brick wall of the state. We have to take the state. We have to make it our own, right?
Mm.
And the only way to do that is through, we have to change the mindset of a large number of people. I mean, it doesn't have to be like even the majority. I mean, the government we have, the Labour government we have, that's been recently elected over here in the UK, by a really big majority, only 20% of people entitled to vote voted Labour. Only 20%, and yet they have it. So you don't, you know, that indicates that in order for us to kind of gain, you know, political,
That's right.
you don't have to change
And
everyone.
I had Jerry Vlasic on. I had Jerry Vlasic on my first episode, and he said elsewhere that he thinks, maybe 80% of people can't be educated, no matter how much slaughterhouse footage you show them, no matter how much you tell them about animal suffering and how healthy and easy it is to eat a vegan diet. But maybe 20% of people can. But as you've discussed, 20% is all we really need to
But
see big changes happen.
and like once you get 20%, and you know, through that you create a society where it's even more easier for people to live as a vegan, and because basically what we have to do is change the culture, because what happens is, you know, everyone born in our society is born into a speciesist culture, human supremacist culture, you see. So that's what we have to
So we
change.
have to change.
Culture, and you only change the culture through changing a sufficient number of individuals, because that's what kind of drives the culture. And I think if we can change, once you change a substantial minority, then it becomes much easier to change more and more people, because it no longer become, because a lot of the resistance to veganism is because it's, people see it as unusual. You know, like humans like to be the same as everyone else. I've never been like that, and that's quite difficult to kind of to understand in a way. But most people are like that. They
My
don't like
attitude was mostly
different.
most people eat meat. That means eating meat's probably the wrong thing to do.
Well, they don't. People, yes, but people don't like to.
But most people are not going to think that way. Most people are
No,
not going to be happy to
but
be told what they've done and what other people have been doing all
but what
throughout history
you do
is
that, you
so
see,
wrong. Yeah.
and I think you've got, um, when you're trying to educate somebody to become vegan, you've got like you've got the arguments you're putting forward to them about why that's the right thing to do. So that's pulling them in. That's pulling them in the right direction. But then they've got other forces pulling them away from that, like that people don't. People are resistant. Humans are resistant to change. In fact, I think all animals are resistant to change. And you know, humans just another animal. You know, we're resistant to change. Most humans don't want to stand out in the crowd. They want to be the same as everyone else. So that's another.
That is part of our
That's
nature.
another factor pulling people. But you see, what we have to do is strengthen the positive sides, strengthen the, you know, the strengthen the side that's pulling people towards veganism through having more vegan outreach.
And the thing
Yeah.
to note is that,
Yeah.
and this is sort of the problem with this is sort of the problem that I think we face during vegan education. Don't mean that we shouldn't try it, but I mean, people all throughout their lives in school are taught things like the food pyramid. I mean, they're given meat to eat by their parents, by their teachers, they're given animal products, etc. And in comparison, even from my perspective as a hardline animal liberationist, it's easy for me to see why someone might think that the people that form 1% of society and go around saying this is a holocaust, this is you know this is a moral atrocity, might be viewed as crazy. And the reality is, I mean, at the end of the day, even if that is the case, we also do have all the arguments on our side. We have some of the best and strongest arguments in philosophy are literally just the arguments in favor of animal rights, because
Yeah.
saying that animals don't have enough value, that because saying that it's okay to kill and torture animals for the reasons we do, which are so trivial, food,
Yes.
cosmetics, etc., is just any
But I,
conception of ethics can't say that's okay. We have the health argument. Veganism is not only sufficiently healthy; it's actually more healthy than the diet that most people eat, etc. And finally, we also just have the environmental argument. I mean, our world cannot sustain the amount of
huge.
animals we're eating. And we also have the practicality argument. I mean, if people say they're against factory farms, 99% of animal products come from there. So even if you're only against factory farms and you think pre-industrial forms of animal exploitation are okay, you should still be a vegan. So I guess as you
Yeah.
said, the hope is that there are intelligent people out there who, once they hear about these things and meet other people, will soon follow it. And that's what happened. That's what happened with me. I mean, if I didn't have
Yeah.
professors, friends, etc., that were vegan, I would have always thought in the back of my head,
Mm.
hey, what we do to animals is messed up, but society allows me to ignore it, so I'm going to. And I
Mm.
think I think I completely see why you
Yeah.
think education can change that. I
Yeah.
think
And I think with those two aspects that are pulling people in the wrong direction, that the more people, the more vegans we create, the more we weaken those reasons,
absolutely.
because that means that it isn't so unusual to be a vegan,
Mm,
and it kind of it's kind of easier. It doesn't involve so much change, because if it's easier to operate in society as a vegan, then that doesn't involve having to change
that's
as.
right.
And so that's, and I think it's just a question of getting more vegans, because we have had this big increase in the number of vegans. I mean, certainly here in the UK, and I think in a lot of other nations. It's just that most aren't active. I'm going back to when I first became vegan in the 1970s, and there was, that was when the the animal rights movement, I suppose, in a sense, was born and grew up. Um, Pretty much anyone that was vegan back in those days was also an activist,
Mm,
and I think the reason for that was um, because it was so difficult to live as a vegan. I mean,
probably
obviously,
the most motivated. Yeah.
yeah, they're more motivated. You see, they're more motivated,
Mm,
and that isn't so much the case, or is very much kind of not the case these days. And it's just a question if we can somehow, that's the sort of problem we have to solve. How do we get more? Because it's only vegans that can
that's
educate
right.
others.
And I think the convenience makes it easy, because around the time I went vegan, I was pretty open with everyone about it. I'm like, hey guys, look, I've just realized we shouldn't be killing animals. How many of you guys are going to follow me on this? And funnily and surprisingly enough, a good few of my friends did. Now, most of them did not stick with it, but of the few that did, I mean, they're not necessarily nearly as involved in the animal liberation movement as I am, or certainly not nowhere near as people like you or some of the other people I've talked to are. But the only thing that held them back was A, knowledge, and B, convenience. And the fact that it's so convenient means that they're just effortlessly vegan, because it just becomes a habit after a while. And I think you're completely right that can completely education can totally convince so many people who would have never who would have never considered it, to do it. And secondly, um, popularizing this just makes it easier for people to do. So I think if there is a direction we can go in, certainly vegan education is going to have to be a huge part of it.
Yeah, I think it's, yeah, I think it does. Wherever else people are doing,
Yeah.
unless we have a large amount of vegan education, we're never going to get very far.
Okay. Well, now we have a viewer question. Thank you, Charles, for submitting. So, what level of violence did you expect necessary to achieve ALF's goals at its foundation? Has that level risen or fallen in your time witnessing the animal industries? and performance of the ALF in combating it. So I did ask him because we use the term violence. I don't consider property destruction violence, but
No,
when
no.
he does say violence, he is including both property destruction and, not that this has ever happened in an ALF or ELF action, potential violence towards human individuals.
Mm. I think the right from the beginning, the AF had a principle of not. I mean, we didn't consider damage to property to be violence.
It's not.
And we had a principle of that we wouldn't, we'd do our best to avoid harm to both humans and other animals in the actions that we took. But that was people adopted that principle for various reasons. There's some some of those involved in the ALF who were pacifists, who were like philosophically opposed to violence, and there were those that, and I would kind of include myself in this next category, who were opposed to harming humans, even those humans that the exploiters of other animals, opposed to doing that for tactical reasons. And I think that was important, because I think if the ALF had embarked on a campaign of violence towards humans, towards the people involved in these industries, then we would have had far fewer activists for various reasons, and there would have been far fewer actions, because there would have been people opposed to that, and then there'd be other people that would, because the prison terms would have been a lot higher for that, even though they ended up pretty high for the damage activities. They would have been higher for if we'd injured or
It's a bit tangential,
killed.
but I always think of the Earth Liberation Front member Jeffrey Lures, who got sentenced to 22 years in prison for torturing 3 SUVs. Like, that is just outrageous.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think Barry Horn got sentenced to 18 years over here.
Barry Horn was 18. That's right.
Yeah.
Rest in peace, Barry.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, Barry's an example. I mean, I always say, well, Barry Horn gave his life for animal liberation, and there's so many vegans that are prepared to give out a leaflet for it. And so I kind of use that as a kind of to try to get people to realise that that they need to be active, at least in a small way.
That's right. And I just want to emphasize for the viewer, I mean, no ALF or ELF or even Earth First or any of these radical groups, none of them have ever killed or seriously injured anyone. And
I think, yeah, I think there is I think there is a problem with arson, though, because I don't think you can be certain that other sentient beings aren't going to be harmed by it.
That's true. I think tactically we have to be very careful with anyone who participates has to be very careful in arson. I'm just saying, as things have happened so far, there's no reason for the categorization by governments as a terrorist group.
No. I think that's totally, and it's also hypocritical, isn't it?
Right.
The governments are bombing, using high explosives to destroy towns, aren't they? They're kind of selling arms all over the world.
Yeah, it's crazy. Around the time where people in the U.S. were being called eco-terrorists or whatever during the Green Scare, because, like I said, they destroyed some property. You had the United States killing hundreds of thousands of civilians in Iraq, the same government.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, this is the huge hypocrisy of it, and that needs to be pointed out. We need to shout that from rooftops. I think we can't. We've got to say things how they are. We've got to tell the truth, and the truth, the fundamental truth is that humans aren't more important than other sentient animals, and we have to say that loud and clear, because unless a sufficient number of humans accept that, we're never going to get very far. And unless we say it, how's anyone going to, come to realise it. It's not going to happen. No, I think we have to be stronger in what we say, and to actually tell the truth, and that is the truth. But I think that there's increasing evidence now about the sentience of insects.
That's right.
And so you can never be sure there's not an insect in a building that's going to be set on fire, or even a vehicle. So I think that's a strong point, kind of against the use of arson. But I think in practical terms, the sort of nature of direct action has changed it anyway. I mean, particularly here in the UK, because it was really important for ALF activists to actually to get away with what they did, to be able to escape, to not be arrested, because they would in many cases be facing long terms of imprisonment if they were caught. And so in planning actions, probably just as much, if not more, planning went into how to get away as to how to carry out the action. But now over here, where we have all the increased surveillance and everything like that, it would be just impossible for the ALF to operate like it did. People would just be caught all the time, and it would just be very, very quickly crushed. So I think what's kind of happened here is the nature of direct action has changed and has become much more. I would say more of a kind, perhaps awareness raising exercise, where what people are doing is they're not trying to actually get away with the actions. Right. So they carry out actions that are like for instance, open rescue would be an example. And we have, I mean, my wife's involved in direct action against the vivisection industry, and she'll go and she gets like eco-friendly paint, her and the other people with her, and they'll do all the laboratory with it, the front of the laboratory, and then they handcuff themselves to the gate and they get arrested, and that gets a lot of publicity. And then when they appear in court and have their trial, that also gets a lot of publicity. And that's a form of direct action, but it's a form of direct action that's it's kind of minor in terms of criminality, I suppose, in terms of what sentence people are going to receive. And it also involves people actually not only kind of not trying to get away, but actually making sure they're still there by handcuffing themselves or gluing themselves to these places. And I think that's the form, very much the form of direct actions taken over here. And it's much more of an awareness raising. It's much more of an awareness raising exercise, I think, as well, because obviously it does exert pressure on it. It does exert pressure on the vivisection industry. It kind of it subjects them to publicity that they don't want. But it also educates all the people what's going on. Creates a rise in opposition to animal experimentation, which is all a good thing.
That's right. All right. Well, thank you so very much for joining me today, Ronnie. That was awesome. We learned so much about the history of the Animal Liberation Front and vegan education. And is there anything you'd like to point people towards? Any groups to get involved in, or anything to learn more about you?
Well, obviously, I think it depends on whereabouts in the world people are. I think probably in every country in the world there are organisations promoting veganism. And I'm
in the UK or the US.
Well, here in the UK, we've got the Vegan Society. We've got a group called Animal Aid. We've got another group called Viva, and then there are, sort of global organisations like We the Free. I don't know whether you have We the Free in the USA.
I don't know.
They're a kind of they do street outreach with videos and stuff like that. There's something people get involved in, and it varies from country to country. But I'm my main sort of focus, I suppose, within vegan outreach is what I call community vegan outreach. In other words, a lot of the vegan outreach that takes place, I suppose, all around the world, tends to be in the centre of big cities, where people have the screens and that kind of thing. And there's very little happens in kind of smaller places, perhaps in the suburbs of cities, or in even smaller cities, towns, even in villages. And I think we kind of have to try to get vegan outreach everywhere, right down to community level. I mean, I live in a village, and I think probably there's, I don't know, maybe a couple of thousand people live here. Well, I've delivered leaflets promoting veganism frequently, around the village. Put them through people's letterboxes. I'm not sure it's possible to do that in the USA, with mailboxes. I'm not sure what the situation is there. Whether you can do that. So I think it might be in some states where people say you can't do it. Okay. But certainly in a lot of places throughout the world, and that's a very simple way of spreading the message. Holding information tables, that kind of thing. We do it. We do it sometimes in the street, but more often we do it at community events where we book an information table. Sometimes you have to pay a small amount to do that. And it's that kind of thing where people are thinking about, well, kind of, perhaps as well as sometimes going into the city to promote veganism, to be able to think about, well, how can I do it around where I live? Because there's people everywhere that need to be educated.
All right. Okay, well, thank you again so much, Ronnie. It was really great to have you on.
No, it's great. It's been a pleasure, Ritik, and I wish you success with your project of interest, interviewing all these interesting people. I think it's great.
We're having some real interesting people on. We spoke about Shaq. Tom Harris from Shaq of the Shaq Justice Project is probably going to be on quite soon. So that's going to be a great episode.
Yeah, Tom, I've read the book. I mean, it was.
Your neighbor kills puppies, right?
Yeah, very, very informative.
Yeah, I've just started it myself.
Taught me a lot I didn't know about the Shaq campaign, because the Shaq campaign ran at the same time as Louise and I were running our Greyhound campaign. So we did occasionally get involved with Shaq, but not that much because we were so busy with our own campaign. So there was a lot of stuff I didn't know about Shaq that I learned from that book, and it was very interesting.